Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Young Black Physicians' fourth installment for the 2022 year of Mental Health Check series. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We thank you and we say happy holidays. We know that this will be playing again and again. Make sure you hit that like button and that subscribe button so that you can, and that share button so that you can send it to other folks who may not be able to join us tonight for the live premiere. Nonetheless, we are going to start off right. We're going to do a quick disclosures and then we're going to get into our agenda and our introductions. Okay, here we go. So one, I'm Dr. Janelle Lee Allen, and I am your moderator for tonight. Disclosures and housekeeping for number one, we have no affiliations with, nor are we receiving any payments or gifts from any pharmaceutical or biotechnological companies for today's event. All of the information shared here will solely reflect the views of the panelists, and this will include panelists' research of nationally available information, as well as the panelists' own personal experiences. We're all docs. The information here is strictly for educational purposes, though. For further questions or concerns, please discuss with your personal healthcare provider. Make sure you have a primary care doctor. With that said, tonight is Mental Health Check for all generations, from the babies to the boomers, okay? With that said, I'm going to move forward to our introductions. We have first our Dr. Elizabeth Johnson. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, like Dr. Lee Allen said, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Johnson. I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, went to the University of Virginia for undergrad, and then made my way to Philadelphia, where I attended Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I then made my way up to Detroit, where I completed a residency in pediatrics with Authority Health at Children's Hospital of Michigan. And so now I am a practicing outpatient general pediatrician.
All right. And then we're going to have our twin doctors, Dr. Jeremy and Jermaine Hochstrom. Introduce yourselves, please.
All right. So I'm Dr. Jeremy Hochstrom on this side.
And Dr. Jermaine Hochstrom.
Yep. And we are both from Chattanooga, Tennessee, born and raised for the most part. Went to undergraduate and at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, then went down to Auburn, Alabama to go to medical school at the Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine, War Eagle, and then on up to Detroit, Michigan for our internal medicine training at Authority Health residency.
All right. So again, I'm Dr. Janelle Lee Allen. I go by Dr. Allen, and essentially I am a gastroenterologist practicing here in Michigan. I went to undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh. I got a degree in neuroscience as well as a concentration in urban studies. Took a detour from medicine and got my master's in urban planning, and also got a chance to really hone in and focus on community development and community engagement for about 7 years. Decided that I really was able to do community engagement no matter what field I got to, and the fact that our health is really a priority for us in many of our Black and Brown communities. So went back to the pursuit of medicine, got my medical degree from Wayne State University, my internal medicine training from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and then came back to Detroit for my gastroenterology and hepatology fellowship. And again, I'm now practicing gastroenterologist and hepatologist here in Michigan. With all that said, let's jump right into tonight's agenda. So let's first start by this whole year has been a really good delve for us into mental health. We felt like at the end of last year, we really had folks who said that is one of the topics that they wanted to talk about more as we were coming off the heels of COVID and the COVID vaccinations, and really doing a lot of educational seminars on that. So this year has been dedicated to mental health. With that said, we started our year off, as always, on MLK Day with our first installment of Mental Health Check, where we really talked about, well, what is mental health? And as long as you have a mind, do we need to take care of it? And the answer is, of course, yes. And we take care of it many ways, through self-care, through self-reflection, also through making sure that when you get into areas that where you're feeling not yourself, and you haven't been feeling yourself for a while, then we get into the idea of going to see someone, going to see a counselor, and really being able to put the pieces together, being able to figure out and break down what's going on in your life with a trained specialist who is able to allow you to see things a lot quicker than you might see on your own. We then moved into getting into, later on in the year, two of our attending psychiatrists, one practicing in Cincinnati, shout out to Joy Moore Felton, and then another one practicing in Detroit, Michigan, shout out to Dr. E. Yoha, who really talked about the difference between mental health and mental illness, and also the importance of either way being able to see a specialist, and being able to be open to the assessments as well as to any medical therapy, and also understanding the most common kind of mental health issues as well as mental illness, which is anxiety and depression, and understanding that when you go through weeks to months of not being able to function day to day, that is more classified by illness, versus when we have times, when we all have times in our lives where things are getting overwhelming, but we're still functioning. We just are not functioning at our peak. That's talking more about mental health. And lastly, we finished the summertime out by talking about on Juneteenth, collective pain and trauma, and talking about the fact that, you know what, we know that every single day, both historical injustices affront us, as well as present day injustices affect us, particularly during COVID. So with that said, we just really are now ending up our year as the holidays are here, and we know that comes with its own stressors, its own kind of worries, and really wanted to close out with talking about, well, what are some things that affect all the different ages, from young people to everybody, to our elders, and that's what tonight is about. So with all that said, I'm going to close out so that we can give it to our Doctors Jeremy and Jermaine Hugstrom. And we're going to start with the babies. And particularly, we're starting with social media. Let's talk about, how does social media affect our young people in today's times and their mental health?
Yeah, so social media is something that has really evolved and has really changed a lot of perception throughout the years. 20 years ago, I mean, even when I was in kindergarten, or, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, social media wasn't really a thing. And so, but now that we have it, the problems arise, right? And what kind of problems are we talking about? Well, with all that we have access to, nowadays we're all flooded with so much through social media. We're flooded with the ideal life that we think that we should have, right? Because social media, again, changes our perception that we should have these things. We have a false perception of what the ideal body type should be, what success should look like, essentially. And all of this is what begins to build anxiety over time, and even depression, because now we hold ourselves up to these standards, and then when we don't achieve these standards, we feel less adequate, and then we kind of feel alone and kind of isolated, and in that corner by ourselves, right? Social media has changed our perception a lot throughout the years, and it can be used for the good, but oftentimes we see more negative than we do see good. And so that's a big issue that still has to be addressed. And, we need to definitely need to take more steps toward concrete solutions for that.
Yeah. And one thing that I have said before is that it creates this sense of unattainable perfectionism, right? Because we see every day, people that drive the fancy cars and live in the big fancy houses, when in actuality, that's only a very small percentage of people. That's not everyone on an everyday basis. But on social media, it is presented as this is everyone this is what everyone is doing, and this is what you must do to be that perfect, successful person, right? So for the majority of people, that's not necessarily going to be the attainable goal, right? And so when people can't attain that, then that's when the anxiety sets in. That's when kind of this sense of failure of not achieving enough sets in. And that creates stress for people. It creates panic, it can create depression.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
I was just gonna say, I think the person who said that, where it stuck for me early on was our esteemed author as well as neuroscientist, Dr. Deepak Chopra. And he talked about that there is this chasm or this difference where what your oftentimes anxiety and depression set in when your expectations are here and reality is here, and your inability to realize what's real, right? And not this false expectation. And that when you're able to reconcile that and really understand, well, this is where I am, it's kind of like, sometimes for people, who are spiritual, it's like, seize the day. This is where you are. This is what God has given you right now. Be thankful for where you are. And sometimes when you start bringing in that gratitude, and, we talk about that as a tool of self-care, having a gratitude notebook or in doing that every day. When you start really feeling like understanding where am I now, you begin to be thankful and understand like, I'm okay. I don't have to be quote unquote up there. And a lot of times you also recognize that may not be real. And I think, Dr. Johnson even talked about the idea of not just, like you said, perceptions of body type, perceptions of, success, what that is defined as, but also, we talk about trauma, and what we see, on a frequent basis, particularly our young people are seeing this all the time. Maybe Dr. Johnson, if you could talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so, I agree with everything that's been said, especially about the effects of social media on our young people. And really, let me backtrack. I want to say first that I feel as if young people are often dismissed when they are expressing some type of anxiety or depression, or they're expressing that they don't feel like themselves. They're often dismissed and said, things like, well, what would you know about stress? What would you know about anxiety? But they're constantly, overwhelmed with things that they see on social media, including, yes, collective traumas. So, things such as the mass shootings, the school shootings that we see, as a person of color, as an African American, seeing killings, by people that are put in place to protect us every day, and not knowing how to navigate, through life, like just always feeling like they're on edge or anxious. And I know we were talking
about news cycles. I think you were mentioning earlier about the news cycles.
Right, about the news cycles. But what I was just going to say is that, we were talking about early on about, what our experience was the first day of school, and what we were looking forward to and what made us nervous. I was nervous about just leaving my mom for this first time. But if you watch the news, they were interviewing some of the children from, Texas with the Uvalde school shooting, and how did they feel about returning to school. And kids are scared. Why? Because they witnessed their friend or their neighbor get killed. This is something that we have to acknowledge that's going on with our kids nowadays. And then just how the landscape of media and the news cycle has changed. Beforehand, it wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. Now it is. And not only is it on our TVs, but it's in our pockets with our cell phones. We're always attached somehow to these traumas and these issues going on. So I just wanted to give some statistics, if that's okay too, right now, or do we want to?
Well, actually, I think if you're going to the statistics that I was thinking of, I think we were going to hold it for one quick second, but I will add in a spot for statistics here. And that was the social media statistics that kind of go along with the news. And social media use. Basically, there was a 2019 study of more than 6,500 12 to 15-year-olds in the US. Of these students, those who were found to spend more than 3 hours a day using social media were found to have a heightened risk of mental health problems. There was even a study that showed, again in 2019, that of more than 12,000 youth that were 13 to 16 years old, this was even across the country in England, found that using social media more than 3 times a day predicted poor mental health and well-being. So, we know that and I can go on and on, there's other studies about poor sleep quality, increased anxiety and depression. The more that you use social media, the more screen time that people have specifically for social media and, things that they can see all the time. These are things that can increase the risk of anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Even I think where you were going was suicidality, and talking about our young people and suicide, and maybe different ways that, before we even get into suicide, some of those things that kind of we can do as parents and as family and as friends. I think Doctors Jeremy and Jermaine were talking earlier about checking in with our young people, because of the fact that this is real. So with that said, I'll go ahead, Liz, if you feel like you want to give your statistics now, or Dr. Jeremy and Jermaine Huckstrom's, if you want to, kind of talk about checking in, just to kind of bounce off of the anxiety and depression standpoint, and then we can bounce back to Liz.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Johnson.
One thing I do want to, kind of reiterate to the parents, especially that are watching, is to check in with your kids when they come home from school, right? So because they're going through their own stressors, they're going through school stresses, they're going through life stresses, they're doing other activities. And when they come home, don't just allow them just to walk by and to just assume that things are okay, because oftentimes things may not be okay. You don't know exactly what happened at school. Mm-hmm. You don't know exactly what they're anxious about, what their fears are, right? And so if you're not talking to them, how will you know if something is off? How will you know when something is not right? So make sure that you're in tune enough with your kids to where, even if they don't say anything to you, that you know that something is off. And you may not know what it is, but and then that can open up the conversation with them to try to get down to the bottom of things and to have that, healthy relationship with them. And it's okay to talk to them about mental health. Like, mental health is not like not like a taboo topic or anything. It's okay to talk to them about it, and to ask them if they're okay. Ask them if they would like any interest in seeking help in that area professionally. Don't again, there's so much stigma around it. People are fearful of that topic, and it doesn't have to be that the way at all. So just keep in mind that your kids, they have young minds. They're heavily influenced by what's going on around them, and they don't have this innate ability to cope with these things.
Yeah. Right. One thing I will say is kind of put yourself in their shoes, right? So think about your first day in kindergarten, or your first day in first grade, right? Or your first day of high school or college. How
or a new job.
Or a new job, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel on that day? You probably were nervous. You may have had a little bit of anxiety because you didn't know exactly what you were stepping into. It was a very huge unknown, thing, brand new thing for you. So that anxiety does exist in kids, and we must recognize that when the kids come home from high school, they have a lot of homework that can be overwhelming for them. But not only that, they may be involved in sports, they might be getting home late. So all of those things really pile on the stress for them. And when I think back to when I was in elementary school, right, I feel like overall for us, our view of the world was very narrow. It was very limited because of how much we were not exposed to on a regular basis. But kids these days, they have cell phones in hand almost no matter what age they are, and they can see what's happening in the world whenever they so choose. So this may generate a lot more anxiety for them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things before we move on to our next topic, and the things that when anxiety and depression go unchecked, or even the thoughts, what are the next steps? So before we get to that, I really just want to kind of point out, we've talked about some practical things of, checking in with your child, really understanding that, yeah, you as an adult have your own stressors, but so does your child. As Dr. Johnson said, being open and not dismissive to what your child is trying to tell you, once they, begin to discuss, and feel open with you to discuss. But specifically for social media, some of the things that our larger organizations are saying is that, there are some things that we can continue to do to protect our children. And it's not just if you're parents, this is if you're an auntie, an uncle, a cousin, anybody in the family, or just a really good friend. If you see some young people, just check in every now and then. So one of the things, though, that people discuss is really trying to encourage limits to how long, people can be on social media. Also making sure that people do have a good bedtime routine. So perhaps, a half an hour to an hour before it's bedtime, it's like, okay, well, electronics off. They also talk about, actually, this particular article doesn't mention it, but one of the things that I find is the same old traditional things. Let your children be active in sports, in just basically other extracurriculars where they have face-to-face time with their peers. Because certainly if you're, playing chess, or if you are in the arts, or if you are in the, preparing for the newsletter, those are times when, you're not glued to your social media. You are actually having to interact and be in a peer-to-peer interaction. It also talks about, particularly for your children, being able to monitor your accounts. And again, anybody can do that. When your teen signs you up or wants to be your friend, whoever you might be in the family or as a friend, check on them, look at their post and say, hey, look, what was this about? Talk to me a little bit more than that. Be active, be present in the lives of our young people. And also sometimes it is, it's important to be able to say, what's not okay, like, hey, this may not be cool. Okay, let's, talk more about that. So it's about encouraging them, but then also about setting certain boundaries, and discussing why things may not be cool, such as bullying, particularly, having them not follow on to the negativity train, or, teasing others, or, damaging other people's reputations, or just really going negative, because we know that that's out there. So just again, talk. And it can be not just parents, but everybody in the lives of young people. We all matter. So with that said, we're going to move now to, well, what happens when anxiety and depression goes unchecked? What happens when our teens are actually having thoughts of harming themselves? And does that even happen in teens? We know that it, we quote unquote know that it happens in all ages, but maybe let's get some statistics about how often it happens from young people all the way down up to our elders.
Well, first, before we just move to that, and this again applies to all ages, but especially when we're talking to teens, I would get asked the question by some parents, well, how do I even know that they're depressed? How do I, recognize depression from just the regular ups and downs that teens have? I thought teens are supposed to be moody. Okay, yeah, to a certain level. But when it starts to interfere with their everyday life, that's not okay. And going back to what Dr. Jeremy and Jermaine both said, if you, one, yes, checking in with your teenager, but if you don't feel comfortable enough to have some of these conversations with your teen, or if your teenager doesn't feel comfortable having the conversations with you, that doesn't mean ignore the problem. If anything, that means take them to someone that they are comfortable to talk to. Take them to, that's why you should have a great relationship with your pediatrician. Find them a therapist. It's okay to do that. So if there are a lot of different emotional or behavioral changes with your teen, please seek help. okay, or anybody that you love in you love in your life, and you notice that something's just not right. They're not themselves. But back to our teenagers. So some data from the CDC just showed really, that the mental health crisis among adolescents is on a rise. From March 2020 to October 2020, mental health related emergency department visits increased by 24% for children 5 to 11 and 31% for those who are 12 to 17 compared with 2019 data. And then just getting down to some other facts, the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics reports that suicide is the leading cause of death in youth and young adults from ages 10 to 24. That is crazy when you think about it. Okay, so it's not something that we can just ignore or dismiss. Something else the American Academy of Pediatrics reported that 8% of high school students reported seriously considering suicide. 9% of high school students attempted suicide within the past year. And that was data from 2019. Some more data, it said every day approximately 18 youth die by suicide. Okay. And then some more startling things for if any physicians are watching this, but for also the parents to keep in mind, 80% of adolescents visited a healthcare provider within the year prior to death by suicide. 49% of youth had visited an ED or an emergency department within the year before their death. 38% of adolescents had contact with the healthcare system within the 4 weeks before their death. And 34% of people aged 15 or older had contact with a healthcare provider in the week before their death. So this is not just a lesson for parents who are watching, but for providers who are watching. Ask questions. Take the time to really do screenings of what we call to see what's going on, because it really can make a difference. I think that I saw on, since we were talking about social media, recently there was a post about someone that committed suicide, someone popular, and someone said in the comments, well, would it have made a difference if we knew this or that? It wouldn't have made a difference if they didn't have that gun. They would have done it anyways. No, it would have made a difference. It would have made a difference if someone was picking up on the signs and was there to help their friend or there to help their loved one. So it's not something to just shrug under the rug and not talk about because it's uncomfortable. But those are some of the numbers that I wanted to make sure I gave.
And I think that's really important because, we talk about it, was like 10%. And sometimes people don't have those personal stories, but I think more and more people are starting to realize, the 6 degrees of separation. I had someone who, 2 people this year actually, who a friend of the family committed suicide. One was 19. Another one was, I believe, either late 20s or early 30s. And I've heard of these last year. It was one person who I had heard of, who had done it. Like I said, this year, now it's 2 people. And of these things, these are people who are under the age of 35, and teenagers. I love what you said about the fact that, would it have made a difference? The truth is, yes, a lot of times people, like you mentioned in the statistics, they know that they're having these thoughts. And a lot of times they disclose it to somebody. Like you said, it may be a doctor, it may be a family member. And once people disclose to you that, then it's about really trying to hone in and really getting close, and really being able to get them the help that they need, so that they can further understand, well, why are they feeling this way? And understand that it is real. It kind of goes back to our thing before. Anxiety is real. Depression is real. Having thoughts of wanting to harm yourself are real. but they all can be overcome. And I think that's the biggest thing that we, really want to talk about for this section and really for this particular area. These things can be treated. These things can be evaluated. You are not alone. If you are having these thoughts, you are not alone. We're going to put up, the fact that we have a new suicide hotline. All you have to do is text 988. There are, many different resources, and it can be treated. You're not alone. People do have these thoughts, and they can have these thoughts for years. But understanding and knowing that you don't have to act on those thoughts, that there are other things for you that is available. There are other options. Death does not have to be your option. There are ways to work out your problems without death. And that there are psychologists, psychiatrists, and there's also support groups out there for those who are having those thoughts. So there is a lot of help out there that's available. And we're going to be putting that up inside of our chat, as well as you should see it appear on the screen in just a bit. So there are resources. Doctors Jeremy and Jermaine Huckstrom, do you want to speak a little bit more on that?
Absolutely. Of course, being in primary care ourselves, I see people with anxiety and depression every single day. And especially now, whenever I see a young person that comes in, the first thing I notice most of the time is that their chart is fine. They have no health problems. There's no high blood pressure, no cholesterol, they're young 20s. And I'm like, well, surely it's school, physical, college, high school, something. But no, it's not that at all. It's oftentimes they start talking to me about that they have anxiety. They have a lot going on in their lives. I had a patient about 3 weeks ago. She had a lot going on in her life, family life, work life, everything was just, going wrong, so to speak. And, we had a great conversation. I had the extra time in the clinic, so I spent the 45 minutes talking to her about what's going on in her life and trying to really get to the root of, why she's feeling this way. And I've kind of made it a thing of mine now is whenever I am asking, many of you may know when you go to a new doctor's office, they ask you about your alcohol, if you drink alcohol, if you smoke, if you do, have you had any history of doing any drug use? And whenever somebody says yes, especially whether it's to drug use or really any of those things, my second question is why? Because I don't like to just dismiss it and say, oh, okay, well, they're drinking. Well, make sure you cut down. Let's maybe drink, if you drink 5 a day, let's try 4 a day and kind of back on. No, yes, but no. I don't like to dismiss it as that. I like to say, well, why do you drink as much as you do? Is there a reason behind this? And oftentimes, yes, there's a ton of reasons behind it. It's they're stressed at work, they're stressed at this, they had childhood trauma that was never properly addressed. That's a whole lot of things that come out, right? And so I always try to use that as my personal gateway into the deepest problem. And I found it to work really, really well. And so with that being said, we are seeing a lot of young people, really young people, especially early 20s, really coming in, struggling to cope and manage with the anxiety and the depression. And I'm happy. The first thing I tell them is, I'm happy you came to see me to talk about it. That's literally the first thing I tell them. Like, I'm so happy you came, you scheduled an appointment, or you called, or we could do a telehealth, whatever. But I'm just happy that you said something, because now we can do something. So now, my young female patient that I had 3 weeks ago, she was, I was concerned. I was highly concerned. Like, she couldn't even get out 2 words and she was sobbing. And now, because we came to an agreed plan together, she's doing like so much better. Like, I saw her the other day on a Zoom call, and she was like, it was like night and day. I mean, she looked better. Her hair was done. She was so upbeat, talked about how, she's made all these changes in her life and she's eating better. She was like, gosh, I haven't had to drink coffee in 2 weeks because I feel that much better now. And I'm like, awesome. That's couldn't really get any better than that. But that's because she asked. She opened herself up to getting professional care. And I was her professional care, right? I didn't have to necessarily even send her to mental health services or psychiatry. Like, I was it for her, and that's all she needed. So keep in mind that even your primary care can be that care. So when the biggest point I want to get at is, if you're struggling with something, just say something. Tell somebody something. Don't keep it into yourself.
Yeah.
And I tell my teenagers in the office, one, like Dr. Hochstrom just said, please speak up, say something, don't be ashamed. There's no shame in saying anything. However, also speak up for your friends, speak up for your family members. If somebody is hurting them, or you are concerned that they're going to hurt themselves, say something. I do not care if they're going to be mad at me. Yeah, but I'd rather your friend be alive and angry with you than not here with us. That's completely different. They will move past that, and hopefully they'll see that was an act of love.
Yeah.
For you is an act of love. That's why I want people to understand, like, oh, why I don't want to ruin a relationship. But there's not going to be a relationship to ruin if the person's not here with us anymore.
Yeah.
So when your friend is going through something and they are in a place, because sometimes you might be, and speaking from experience, you might be in a place that you don't know how to say something for yourself anymore. You don't know how to say anything anymore. So to have someone who is like, let me help you, let me help carry some of that load, and I'm going to say something for you. That's amazing. So don't be afraid to speak up.
And I totally agree with that, because we also know that it's around the holiday times, right? And that brings on its own additional anxiety, depression. It also brings on grief, right? Sometimes these are the first holidays that we're having without loved ones, or without significant others, without best friends. And sometimes we can really get to the place that, we begin to think about how much we feel a loss for people, right? How much we don't have. And sometimes we can have a harder time remembering those good memories, right? Remembering all of the things about someone's life, remembering all the good things about your own life. And we can just get into, again, those expectations. It's the holidays. It should be like this. It should be like that. I should be able to travel here. I should be able to see all, of my folks here. I should have this amount of money. I should, all of these shoulds. Forget about that should. The bottom line is, think about what we have, and think about, the people who you can reach out to. And particularly this time, this kind of gets into us talking about the same kind of things that we've discussed, but even for our folks who are not young people, who are middle-aged, and who are elders, right? Because that's when, holiday things affect us, right? And just to know, again, I'm going to throw out that number for those people who, if you're struggling with anything, I mentioned that you can text the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, but you can also call them. So text or call 988. Again, call or text 988, so that you can get resources if you're feeling any type of way, if you're feeling like you're overwhelmed, if you are, even if you may not feel like exactly suicide, that particular number can also refer you to other different resources in your area. And if they can't, you can see your primary care doctor. So know that, the idea of having thoughts about self-harm affects all ages. We talk right now about a lot of young people, but we're also speaking to those people who are middle-aged. We know that people commit suicide who are over the age of 35 and over the age of 50, and even people in their 60s and 70s. So know that if your friends and your family, you see some warning signs, maybe that's what we need to talk about. What are some of those warning signs that people should be looking at if people are not just, maybe they're not explicitly saying self-harm, maybe they're saying other words, maybe they're doing things like, paying off all their bills and telling you, I think sometimes it's about time, if they're, making hints and suggestions that they feel like they are, needing to leave or needing to settle their affairs. Anybody else got some warning signs that they can throw out for people who may not be young people, but who are middle-aged or older, who are still thinking of self-harm?
If someone flat out says to you, I want to kill myself. I feel like people think that someone's not going to say that. They will. Feeling hopeless, having no reason to live. If they feel like they're a burden to others, I feel trapped. The pain is unbearable. Certain behaviors, we already talked about alcohol or drug use, but if it's increasing, like Dr. Hawthorne said, like, why are you drinking so much? If you notice someone's increasing certain things, right? Maybe they're trying to drown their pains or their sorrows. If people are looking for a way to end their lives, like search, if you're a parent or a loved one and you come across on their computer, like they were researching how to end their lives, say something. They're withdrawing from things that they love to do. They don't want to. I feel like the biggest warning sign, or one of them, is if they don't even want to talk to their inner circle. If somebody's isolating from their inner circle, that's a problem.
Yeah. And that's just that key thing is all signs of isolation, right? And so whenever you see anything like that, just know that that's a red flag, and and try to be very proactive when you see that.
Absolutely. So, and remember, as we're going through, guys, put questions in the chat, share your own experiences. There, you never know, there may be somebody on this call who needs to hear your personal experience, or someone on this live premiere who needs to hear your own personal experience and the things that you did. So feel free. This is an open environment. It's a safe environment. Please don't put any names or information to that extent. But if you just mention, hey, I had a friend, or hey, I had a family member, share your stories and be, feel free to do that. Lastly, almost second to last, we're talking about, things affecting all ages. And we just talked about suicidality being something that affects all the ages. But let's get into, what about grief and loss? It's kind of one of these things, and loneliness, that, things get hidden. Sometimes people, aren't self-alienating, maybe, as we get older, we end up losing some of our best friends. We end up losing some of our siblings. Maybe our parents are no longer alive, or maybe our parents are alive and we are becoming, their main caregiver for it. Or maybe our children have left the house and we're still searching for a newfound purpose, or getting to know ourselves again, and feeling that loss again, focusing on loss versus, that being most prominent. Let's talk about grief and loss and how a lot of times that affects our elders, and what do we do about that for them? Or maybe sharing your own personal story as well.
Grief and loss are big, whether it's loss of a loved one, or like you said, loss of a job, a position that you love. I think that with each generation, the way we looked at our jobs or careers was very different. There's like often a joke on social media right now that like this current generation, like if we don't like something in a job, we'll jump from job to job, right? But with generations like my dad's generation, they were in a job or a career for decades, right? They were committed to that job, and so retiring or leaving that can feel like a loss. And so that's something in just like anything that's affecting your mental health, there can be changes to people's moods, whether somebody is sad or irritable, having more like angry outbursts. So if you notice that, just practice listening. I would say that. And not, once again, not dismissing how they're feeling, but validating and then encouraging them, because this also goes back to the stigma of mental health. It's okay to talk to someone, because hey, we're not always equipped to help our loved ones with the issues that they may be having, or how to move forward. And then when it comes to grief, when it comes to like loved ones, the biggest thing I can say from personal experience is don't tell someone how to grieve. Again, listen. I've shared with on our talks, and I've shared with the group before that I lost my very close and dearest best friend. And I remember I had someone, when it was coming up on his birthday, someone said, "You still miss him?" And I was just like, always. That was actually my response. Always. Mm-hmm. Like, nothing will repair that wound, right? Grief just changes. And something that is, if you've never experienced such a loss like that, you shouldn't try to push your, I guess, thoughts or how you would do something, because you don't know how they are feeling. You should just listen and understand that for those who are out there grieving, things change. You learn to live with, it's like almost like a parasite you don't want, but you learn to live with. And sometimes you have good days, and then there's other days that it bites you and reminds you that it's there, and that's okay too. And that's okay to talk to someone. But that's my biggest thing. Listen, and don't tell someone that whether how to grieve or it's too long to grieve. It's not going to change.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. Actually, I was just coincidentally, I was just talking to a patient the other day about the grief process, and I was, I definitely agree. It's not necessarily about a time thing. It's about just watching for the red flags type of thing again. So, when you grieve, you're always going to miss that person. You're going to feel down. You're going to feel sad. That's like completely normal. Things that you shouldn't experience for prolonged periods of time, though, are complete dysfunction to where you can't go about a daily life. Right now, that's where it does become a problem, and you can't. Again, we stress that to seek the help. Right? Don't push people away. Try to be open-minded to seeking mental health. I don't want anybody to ever feel like that mental health is only for a certain type of person, right? Mental health care. It is not. It's for everybody, right? It's for everybody. And so, don't think that it's kind of like one of those things where, I'm okay. I'm not that kind of way. I'm not having these thoughts. No, we all have a brain, so we all need proper mental health care. Okay. Right. So that just goes to say, with the grieving process, this is what I talk about my patients too, is, it's okay to grieve, and it's going to hurt for a long time, but I don't want you to have a dysfunctional life, right. So with that, and I always tell them, when you get to that point, if you feel like that you need to escalate your care, let me know. I have absolutely no problem at all with getting you the help you need at all.
Right. And one thing I do try to encourage patients, especially when they're going through a grieving process, is to, allow people to check in on you. Don't try not to shut everyone out. As much as you would like to just, stay in bed all day or stay at home, not answer the phone, allow people to be there for you and allow them to check in on you and see how everything is going.
And like Dr. Johnson said, she's experienced a tragic loss, and my brother and I, we've both experienced a tragic loss, very sudden tragic loss in our lives too. So we can absolutely relate to that side of things. And so, but again, if it gets to the point where your life is dysfunctional, you can't do daily things, then that's where we need to seek help. Okay.
Yep. That means tell your doctor. If you have a family member who's going to bring you to the doctor, go to the doctor. There may be some medications that can be begun. There may be some counseling. There may even be a sense of needing to be checked into the hospital on the inpatient side, actually having to spend the night at the hospital to be evaluated and to really figure out what are the things that they can do to help you, what medications would be great for you, what monitoring sometimes just is needed, what group therapy is needed. So there's a lot that can come with all mental health and all mental illness and all mental conditions, okay? Lots of, the field has progressed a whole lot. I think the other thing that I think sometimes people forget is to be gracious for yourself, right? Sometimes, again, it's this expectation. I should be, all of these are the same themes. I should be here, or I should be able to get over this. Like Dr. Johnson said, sometimes people push that onto you, but be gracious for yourself. If you know that you have been getting out there, maybe you're back to work, Maybe you are, just had a really busy week, and you kind of are having a sad day. That's okay. Reach out to someone, talk to someone, give yourself patience, and be okay with that. Today may not be a good day. And it's okay for your close, friends and relatives who you can trust. If they text you and say, hey, I'm praying for you, how you doing? And you say, yeah, today is not so good. You can share that, and that's okay. Don't feel like you have to be the person of steel and not have any feelings or any emotions, and just keep going and keep pushing. Sometimes, there's a saying that, we got to check on our strong friends, right? Because sometimes we can be strong for too long and not let go, not know how to let go. And it kind of builds and builds. So we want you to just kind of monitor yourselves. And for those, if you're on the other end, like Dr. Johnson said, being able to be an active listener, just really not saying anything, but really saying, tell me more. What else can be, just, maybe now not being the time for questions, but really being able to say, I'm here for you. Whatever you want to talk about, I'll listen to. Let me know when you want me, to have any input, or if you want me to just listen, that's what I'm here for. So that's some good stuff.
Be supportive. And just something I want to say, like, there's counseling for everything, including grief.
Yes.
So there are grief counselors out there. And like Dr. Allen said, you don't always have to be quote unquote strong. In fact, or what we perceive as strong, right? We perceive as being strong as, I'm going to hold this together. I'm going to get through for my kids. I'm going to get through for the family. I can't show any signs of I'm hurt. But I actually think that's a bigger sign of strength to know when you need help and when to say, I need help. Like, that is a huge sign of, like I tell kids that in the office all the time when it just comes to schoolwork. If you need help,
just say something.
I'm like, say something. Don't wait until
parents know.
Don't wait until you have failed the class.
Right.
Something. And I'm like, I know that it may seem off topic, but I tell the kids about my first day of AP physics. Okay. I didn't know what that man was saying. I came home and I told my mama, I said, I need a tutor.
That's right.
And she was like, what? It's only the first day. And I said, but I don't know what he said.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I carry that in all aspects of my life. Like, after I lost my friend, like, I immediately was like, okay, I am numb. And I called the therapist.
Yeah.
I was like, I will get back into counseling because I need help. I recognize, because I wanted to clarify, like, I agree with, when I was saying about grief, of like, listen and don't tell someone how to grieve, but it is important to recognize when, like Dr. Hochstrom said, when it's becoming dysfunctional, right? Mm-hmm. When it is affecting your life. And I recognize, like, I need help. I can't do this on my own.
And I think that one of the critical things that we've kind of all been talking about is that, honestly, I think all of us have had periods of our lives, and sometimes continuous, where it's a privilege, it's actually a privilege to be able to get the help that you need, to be able to go to a counselor and say, hey, I am stuck, and I don't know where to go from here. I've tried all that I could try, and I now need help. It's a privilege to be able to do that. Like, you can tell your doctor, if you're a spiritual person, I have been praying about this problem. I've, done all the things that I know to do. I've, tried to do this, I tried to do that, and it doesn't seem to be working. I need help, and for a qualified therapist or a qualified psychiatrist to be able to say, I got you. Here's the things that we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do. And remember what we said earlier in the year. You may find somebody who may not be a good fit or a good match for you. That doesn't mean therapy or counseling or medications is a no-go. It means that you have to find somebody new. Start the process again and find somebody until you feel comfortable with them and until you feel like this is a good match. I feel like I can see the light of day coming. I feel like I see my transformation. And again, don't stop praying, but faith without works is dead. Keep doing as well. With that said, we're kind of closing out, guys. We're closing out, closing out. I tell you what, I'm gonna throw out you a challenge. A challenge. Somebody asked us to talk about seasonal affective disorder. And this is kind of a little one more tidbit. This is a little bit of icing on the cake. Somebody give me what seasonal affective disorder is in 2 minutes or less, and what we usually do about it. Go, anybody.
All right. So a seasonal affective disorder. Long story short is when the seasons affect your mood, right? So that usually shows along the lines of falling into some sort of depression with the change of seasons. And most classically, we traditionally associate that with the winter and fall seasons. But it can also happen in the spring and the summer seasons, actually. So what are some things to look out for? Well, you might find yourself I could put it this way. If it's in the wintertime, you might find yourself sleeping a little bit more. You might find yourself eating a little bit more, craving carbs, having more weight gain, feeling tired, maybe even loss of libido. In the summer and the spring version of this, it can basically present as almost the opposite, where you can't sleep, you have more insomnia, you might have decreased appetite, you might have weight loss as opposed to weight gain, right? But nonetheless, it's changing with the seasons. Now, for the large majority of people, this would typically resolve with the change to back to the next season. However, that doesn't mean that you don't need help. But I also want to talk about who's at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this, from a standpoint, will typically affect females and usually a younger population, and usually people that live in the higher latitudes. And by that I mean, Alaska, North Dakota, Michigan, Maine, Minnesota, New York. So those northern areas is predominantly where we will see this. But that doesn't mean that if you live in sunny California or sunny Florida, that this can't affect you. And so just kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, and so when it comes to treatment of seasonal affective disorder, because it's basically a form of depression, it's like a subset of major depressive disorder, we will still treat it with, first of all, one of the number one recommendations, especially in the fall and the winter months, would be light therapy. So you can come up, with your physician, or oftentimes psychiatrists, you'll come up with like a regimen of light therapy. And that could be something as simple as increasing the light in your house. Like don't walk into your house and it's dark and it's gloomy, light it up, plug in some extra light bulbs here and there. Now I know we're all concerned about electrical power costs and things like that. So
use the LED version.
The LED versions, right? A little more energy efficient, but simply brightening up your house. I love light, so I don't like, darkness. You always catch my house being lit up nicely. Number two, in combination with that, you often might start with an antidepressant. And just to throw out some names that you might hear if your physician might prescribe them to you, you might Zoloft, Lexapro, Celexa, bupropion. These are all medications that are antidepressants that are often the first line of therapy for depression. And so just so you can be familiar, if you hear these terms come up, it's not anything to be scared of. Again, I don't want you to be thinking that, if I take these medications, people are going to think I'm crazy and this, that. No, it's normal. Again, this is part of seeking mental health care. These are options that are available, and it's completely normal to be on them. Okay.
Absolutely.
And then,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I thought you were at your 2 minute mark, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
2 more seconds, go.
Yeah, so but just some other things to think about apart from light therapy and antidepressants is exercise. Getting exercise is known to increase serotonin levels, which makes you feel better. Not only that, sleep hygiene. So what do we talk about sleep hygiene, right? So sometimes we can sleep too much, like taking too many naps during the day. That can be counterproductive. Have a regular sleep schedule, that helps. Avoid doing excess activity in your bedroom besides really sleeping, right? So don't do schoolwork in there. Don't do office work in there. Avoiding alcohol before bed. Avoiding smoking, especially in the evenings, and try to avoid going to bed hungry, because then you don't sleep well. So these are all tips. Again, sleep hygiene, sleep is extremely important, and exercise is also extremely important as well.
Awesome. So with that said, we are coming into our the end of our fourth installment for the 2022 year, the mental health check series done by yours truly, Young Black Physicians, at least a subset of us. We truly thank you for coming out tonight and for being able to if you haven't already, press that subscribe button if you haven't already, and make sure that you click that share button for those people who may be able to benefit from this talk and just were not able to make this live premiere tonight. With that said, we are going to circle back and have our last words. And reminding everybody again, happy holidays. Here's our last words and our love to you from us to you. We'll start.
So again, guys, like Dr. Allen has already said, if you are in crisis or someone else is in crisis, you can call or text 988 or text TALK, TALK, to 741-741. Okay, so speak up for yourself or for someone else that you love. I promise you, you'll regret not saying something.
I'll definitely leave it with, kind of similar to what Dr. Johnson was saying. If you need help, please definitely do seek it out. And for our providers, if you see a patient that you think is struggling, because oftentimes when we first see a patient, we don't always ask them, how do they feel? Just ask them, how are they doing? How are you doing? And oftentimes they will really open up to you. Yeah. And again, just as we all said before, if you need the help, say something and just say something. And if you see somebody that needs help, say something. With that being said, mental health is for everybody, and don't think that you are too good for it and that it somehow doesn't apply to you, because you'll need it when the time is right.
Amen.
And I'm sorry, one last word.
Yes, last.
Please, people, if you're watching this, it's also important to support legislation that would increase mental health resources for our communities. Because one last stat, this is from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, but 72% of communities in the United States did not have enough mental health providers to serve residents in 2021, according to federal guidelines. That is a problem. So, and it's a responsibility for, of us as providers and for our communities to stick up for one another.
And I just want to add that we haven't talked about this in this particular call, but just to kind of bring it on home. Young Black Physicians, we initially got started because it was a number of us who said, we want to help. Specifically, it was a response to COVID-19, and we wanted to help stop the deaths, the disproportionate deaths that were happening in our communities. Why are we still doing this now? Because there are still deaths that are unfortunate and preventable deaths that are happening in our community. We dedicated this whole year to mental health. And we are ending on this note because it's not over. Well, these videos will be available to you in the future. They're going to be on our YouTube channel. But just to hone in 2022, we want you to remember that your mental health is of utmost importance. The same way, to quote Dr. Iyoha, our psychiatrist, that you wouldn't walk around here with a broken arm and just sit and do nothing about it, is the same way that your mental health is as important. It's the same thing. It's a part of your body. It is a part of your mind, your body, your spirit. It is a part of you living your best life, you living your life most abundantly. So take heed, know that we are doing this because we want to make sure that people are living and living well, and that we can do as much as possible to decrease preventable deaths. Okay. So with that said, happy holidays, enjoy, spread the word, like, subscribe, share, and until next time, as always, we're going to have something on MLK Day. So we will see you in 2023. Happy New Year and all that jazz. Thanks again.